Good evening and welcome to this edition of Seattle Insight. I'm your host, Natasha Smith. This program aims to take a closer look at public affairs issues of interest to Seattle citizens. I think one of the most important goals of media is to try to reach out to communities and to hear voices from people that you don't normally hear given voice to in the media. Tonight we wanted to talk with some of the other communities of color. Over the past, I'd say, month or so, we've heard a lot from the African American community because of the shooting that happened in the Central area on May 31st. Taking a look at some of the media reports that came out of that, you would think that Seattle was very divided along black and white, but this is actually a city that's very rich in diversity. So tonight we are talking with some representatives of different communities of color. Tonight, joining me here is Elisa Miranda. Thank you for joining us. She works with El Centro de la Rasa. Also, Dr. Camilode Guzman, with the president of the Filipino Community of Seattle, and also Steve Gallion, who works with the Seattle Indian Health Board. Thank you all for joining me here tonight. Well, let's start off with the shooting that happened earlier this month. As I said, it was a very polarizing issue for members of the African American community. How did that incident play out in other communities of color in the city? Too big of a question right off the top.
Well, for example, in Centro de Rasa, that representation of the Latino community actually was part of the mass mobilization and organizing of the marches and the rallies, and also a community forum, which happened, I believe 2 or 3 weeks.
The one at First AME Church?
Yeah, the one at First AME Church. Roberto Maestas is very involved in police brutality issues. He's the executive director of the Centro, and
he founded El Centro, right?
Yeah, along with like a lot of people.
One of the co-founders.
One of the co-founders, and we've all been involved in the things and the press conferences and as well as marching as one of the peacekeepers at the moment. So, I mean.
Have there been representatives from the Filipino American community as well taking part in some of these? Or, as she said, I didn't know that other communities had been involved in a lot of the rallies and things.
Well, we have, as a community, had our share, in this kind of incidents. If you still probably you don't remember, but the Filipino community was involved in a drive-in shooting way back in 1993. We're in Filipino youngsters that were involved in the shooting, and our community at that time probably did feel just like the way the African community are feeling it right now. But we have learned and we have grown, and at this point we just have to look at it in a very objective manner, I mean, there was also a time when the community hated the police. They always feel that whenever something happens, it's the police's fault. But that has changed in my community. We now partner with the police, and I think this is one way of making our lives better and making the city a better place to live. I mean, actually, the first advisory group to the chief of police came from the Filipino community, and there are now 7 advisory groups to the chief of police, and we're working with the chief of police and the police department to make sure that there is a two-way traffic. I mean, they hear our concerns, and we hear also their concerns. And in this way, I think this is probably the best way to approach this situation.
Similar situation.
Well, I'd have to agree. I mean, I think that one of the things that effectively, I think for our community that assisted us was the former police chief, Stanford, and the community policing that he kind of helped to really strengthen and initiate. And one of the things I think for us, I know as an organization, that was very helpful is he was very supportive, came out to a lot of our community groups, really in our meetings and community functions, and really tried to open at least his hand out to say that he wants to hear our concerns. And I think that made a big impact for us. It's a very difficult issue. I mean, extremely difficult, and I think just kind of observing it there, the Native community is so vast and big, and most certainly we're very supportive of our community members that work for the police force, and we have to acknowledge that. And then but there's another aspect of our segments of our community that are impacted by. Or how they feel that they are not represented right. And so, I mean, it's a complicated issue like the community, the Indian community of Seattle, which is a very big and vast community with over 30,000 people that live here. So, it just depends.
Something that has really resonated for me over the past month or so is we tend to think of the different communities of color as sort of monolithic, like the Black community thinks this or the Asian community thinks this. And as you said, they're not monolithic. They're made up of very complex individuals and groups and segments and different things like that. And so you can't really pinpoint and say this is what one group of people thinks about a particular issue.
Yeah, or I as an individual say this is what the Indian community thinks.
Exactly. And it's very tough sometimes, I think, to get the different voices out there, and that's something that has actually been said a lot during like the rallies and things. And I think there's a real feeling that certain voices are not being heard by, I guess, the people in power or leaders in the city. That a lot of people just sort of feel, I guess, disenfranchised, or like their voices are just not being heard by political leadership.
I think one of the things is that I've noticed through the forums and the kind of, since David Walker.
Which, the shooting last year.
The shooting last year, last year. It's not that the voices aren't being heard, but the real issues aren't being placed on the table. And I realize, there's different tactics that the police chief has used where he's not realizing that it's a racism issue, because it is. There's prevalent racism within our community, within our society, and a lot of times resentment gets toward, that hate that you're talking about, the Filipino community felt back then. A lot of young people feel that now towards the police, and kind of interesting when people, I heard a person had came to me after a discussion and was just furious because they're saying something how they're hearing over the radio, over the Aaron Robinson, that the people of color teach their young kids to hate police when they're young in the ghettos, and I'm like, you don't teach somebody that. That's something that they feel, and that's very strong right now amongst a lot of young people. There's a lot of anger rising amongst the young people, and I know that, but I think a lot of it is because we're becoming more educated, and we're seeing that, it's not maybe blunt in your face racism, but it's behind your back, behind closed doors racism, and it's blunt, when they can get away with it.
Having been here for a while, Dr. Guzman, you mentioned you came to Seattle in 1969 from the Philippines.
Yeah.
Has it changed very much? As she said, for young people, they feel like, there's still this major struggle going on against forces of racism. Do you feel that there's been much of a change, or is it because you've mellowed as you've matured?
Change to me is the only constant thing in this world. But I know that there is a change, but as to whether it is something that is fast enough to be enjoyed by the next or so generation, I don't know. But I believe when I came here, I always tell my children, you don't look like white, and we know that we are going to encounter some kind of racism, but you have to be more tolerant, and you have to be more patient, because in the long run, these virtues of yours will help you, get to be respected, and as you grow older and become a part of the community, then you will see that there will be some mellowing, that will come along the way. I know of many young activists in my community, and once they were able to get their education and fit into the system, then that anger, that hatred kind of disappears, and then they fit into the big main community, and they start turning around and trying to help the younger ones, that they feel just like those younger ones when they were young,
Right.
But there is always a change in a person's life wherein you would be really happy to realize that you were able to reach that stage of your life. And again, there is always racism. I mean, we could not remove that, but we have to be more tolerant, and we have to live with it. I mean, as long as the people who are actually responsible in taking charge of our city, of our county, of our country, are cognizant of this issue, then there will be change. I believe that there will be a change for the better.
I think for a lot of people, as you mentioned, who are turning out for some of these rallies, and you said the young activists in your community, there's a feeling that change is just not happening quick enough. But you did mention something that kind of plays off something you said, that there needs to be sort of a two-way street where people in the community, maybe former activists or current activists, are reaching out and sort of working within the system. And also there's outreach from the other side as well, that the political establishment or the police leaders are also making that, bridging that divide there.
Yeah, I think I was struck with something that you said. There are many Native people who are part Filipino and part Alaska Native.
Yes.
And one of the things that, in one of the little projects that I was doing, we were doing little community organizing groups around substance abuse and reducing the harm associated with that. And there were examples that some of our elders brought up, and one of them was one of our elders who was one of the folks for the Filipino Youth Hall that put their house up for sale to create this hall, and was one of those folks that did that are not for sale but put a mortgage on her home. Multiple people, and I really felt that was true commitment when you do that, so that you're making that kind of commitment for your community to that you're going to have a place for kids to be able to go to, that they're going to feel safe, that they're going to learn, that there's a gathering point for the community. And I just thought that was really wonderful. And then also struck by other points where some of the first rallies that happened before, where people gathered before they went up to to Daybreak Star for the takeover, happened there. It was a large hall. The Filipino community opened their arms to the Native community to come in, and struck by that. So yeah, it's interesting. It's great.
You mentioned there are lots of issues that are really not being talked about, because it does seem sometimes that when we do have public discourse or things that are talked about in the papers or in the media or even in community papers, it seems to be the same points or same issues raised over and over. What are some of the issues that are not being talked about, or that are being kind of glossed over? Like, we're so focused on this, we don't even realize this big thing that's kind of brewing over here.
I think there was a lot of concerns on basically the community has asked, that not only that there be a Seattle Police Review Board, but also that because if you look at the dynamics of the Seattle Police Department, the GIL has a lot, the Seattle Police Union has a lot of power within the police department, and that's just, for a police department who has had so many difficulties, and I'm not trying to downplay the police department at all. I know some really good police officers that have come to the Centro and really try to work with the Latino community as well. We had a Seattle Police Forum that I helped organize there at the Centro. But it's just that there's so much power allocated to one part, And the review boards really don't get a chance to really have a voice on what's said. I mean, a lot of people are very discouraged from the David Walker case that it wasn't really investigated thoroughly and that it was corrupt. And a lot of these, you know, and it's coming out just because of the fact that it took the shooting for people to get mad, but people are getting pulled over because they look black. People are getting, you know, pulled over because they look Latino and are getting harassed because they look a certain way or act a certain way. And I think these are issues that have come up ever since, you know, you probably came here from far behind.
Right.
And I mean, it's been a major issue. And I think the police department has mentioned a lot of times, yes, there's discrimination, but one of the things that is really important to realize is it's not just discrimination, it's racism, and there's two different elements in that. And the community has asked that, you know, that they realize, you know, what is racism? Because a lot of times the police department, honestly, I mean, in my opinion, I feel has no clue to what racism is, because, I mean, that's the major part of, before you start seeing what's wrong, why don't you start educating before? Because I think that's a major thing. Before you start going out there and going to rallies or talking about certain issues, it's important to be educated about what you're talking about or what you're marching about or what you're fighting for or what you're striving for. And I think what's really important is that, you know, they start educating their own police officers.
Well, it's probably important to mention, as you said, that there's racism in the police department. The mayor mentioned this on Monday during a call-in show, that there's racism in society, and the police department, just like any other group, is representative of that society. So there is going to be racism. But one thing that we weren't able to touch on then, but one of the callers mentioned after the show, was that they would support diversity training for the police department. And again, the police department as a whole, you can't say the whole department is racist or the whole department has this view or that view, because they are, you know, getting more diverse. So, you know, there are individuals there as well who hold different viewpoints. But that was something that someone else brought up, was maybe diversity training is a start on some of this.
Well, I know, like,
about maybe about a year or and a half or 2 years ago, when you speak of profiling, the police agencies around here did not believe that there was such a thing until a lot of reports have come out in the papers, and then it reached us here. And I had a chance to work with the police department in the capacity as a representative in the Police Community Action Council. And so when it became very clear that there is such a thing going on, then the profiling, then they begin to address the issue, and it is now being addressed. And that is one thing that we are really very fortunate, because at least this issue has come to the front, and now the police are doing their thing to address the issue. And even if it came only now,
it's a start.
At least it has started. And in the training of the police officers, they are at this point giving emphasis to the sensitivity of the so many ethnic groups living in the area. And so in the academy, in my community, they get we have a youth empowerment program, and 2 or 3 people from this program go and actually actively participate in the diversity training, sensitivity training of future police officers. And hopefully that this will change, you know, the way they look at people who are not white, you know.
You mentioned that it seems like the Police Guild has a lot of power. How do communities of color, I guess, harness or find or use their own power? Because clearly, I think it's something that is not being used to its fullest potential. You know, a lot of people are not voting or may not even be registered to vote. Is there some way for communities of color to harness the power of their voice, of their numbers, of their political strength or economic strength?
Sure. Yeah,
Bring it on.
there's lots of examples of that. I mean,
Yeah.
I think when you look at the social agencies, the native social agencies of Seattle, those are purely representative of the community's will to create those, and particularly Indian women. So I mean, when you, beginning with the American Indian Women's Services League, which were able to create points of meetings and gatherings, and you know, they weren't elders then; they're elders now. But I mean, these women basically were able to create a lot of meeting points for community members to assemble, because in Seattle, in the landscape, I know, particularly in Seattle, it's different than others like Minneapolis or Albuquerque. I mean, you don't have like a town that's, okay, this is the native town, this is where all native people live. They're spread all out to the city. And it hasn't significantly changed over the past 25, 30 years. So I mean, by allowing these points of meetings, by allowing people to collectively go, oh, I didn't know there was so many native people that lived here, and these rallying points, and also they did stuff like they taught a lot of the men how to balance checkbooks, and you know, because a lot of the native folks, particularly in the 40s and 50s, were brought over here with the government doing a lot of education programs and trying to move a lot of native people outside of the reservation onto large metropolitan areas in the hopes that they would, of course, be
Assimilated.
Assimilation. It was part of the assimilation process of the federal government. And that wasn't what was happening. And these gals who were really concerned about these issues started a lot of this basic institutions that we see now today. And it's resulted in some of the shining jewels of social service and healthcare institutions in the nation that are right here in Seattle from these women. And there are many examples of that.
Was that in the 70s, early 70s?
Actually, that was before then.
Oh.
Yeah, a lot of folks look at the rallying point with the takeover of Discovery Park in the very, very early 70s. And it actually happened, I think, before then, because without these meetings, without these groups, these rallying points for people to congregate beforehand, you wouldn't have probably have seen as strong or as fast of a result the Moccasin Telegraph, because where would people have known to turn?
Right.
And so I mean, I think that's a really strong example. I mean, these are very strong institutions that will be around probably for the next 25, 30 years, that will be providing support for their community members and trying to address some of the long-term issues that are impacting our communities. And I speak of the Native community. Because there are a lot of issues that are going on, and not just the idea of the police issues, but you've got poverty issues, you have access to healthcare issues, you have education issues, which are a huge one in this town.
Educational disparities.
And they have a lot of far-reaching impact, particularly when you're looking at the poverty. And you've got a city that over the last 5 years has become very expensive to live at. So what's happening? You've got a lot of folks that are having to move outside of the city and move further away. And what will that do? Well,
they're losing connection to those centers. As
those
you said.
centers, or in a broader perspective, as a lot of the communities start. I'm thinking probably long term, it's going to impact, how much the city will provide into to social service programs. It's going to have it will have a long-term impact. I mean, if you have less people living in a region, who's paying the taxes, the sales taxes for the goods that are going on. So there's a lot of things that that I think when you look at the issues surrounding Native people living here in this county, there are a lot of them, and particularly in the city, that you just can't isolate and go, okay, there's one. I mean, at the health board, we are right now looking at a lot of different issues, and
A lot of them are interrelated as well.
Well, they are, and when you look at basic, and this came out of some papers that came out just a few years ago when you looked at mortality rates and basically people of poverty and what were the significant issues surrounding that, and there are three. One is access to health care, the other one is poverty, and the other one is access to education. Now, if you can address all three of those kinds of things, you're going to have a lot better outcomes on how long people live. There's a lot of statistics that just say if you can get someone into college that their overall behavioral risks start lowering immediately. And it doesn't even matter if they graduate. If they just get to the first year of college, you'll actually see people making different kinds of decisions around behavior. So, I mean, and then you've got enrollment rates at the University of Washington that are dropping for minorities. I mean, and particularly for Indian students. And so, yeah, there are a lot of things to be concerned about in the long term, that will impact this community, or our community.
When you mentioned the social aspects of it, the social service aspect of it, that's something that I know El Centro has dealt a lot with, as well as the Filipino Community of Seattle, because both of those organizations, the Filipino Community of Seattle started out as a social organization, but has become social service over the past few decades. And El Centro, obviously, from the very beginning almost, has been very involved in social service, providing health care, access to education, access to services.
Yeah, I mean, something that you mentioned right there, I mean, not even with college, I mean, public education, I mean, we were, Centro Rasa has been very involved in a mobilization on ending the disproportionality gap and really addressing issues that are affecting our young people. Why are young people failing in school? Why are they not succeeding? Why are they dropping out? Why are they being this way? And a lot of it has to do with racism. We found that a big key issue. One of the interesting things was that when we were doing a study on Latino students, we found that Latino students ranked second to last in almost all standardized testing in Washington State, and Indians, Native Americans almost ranked last, which was, but you know, when it came out to dropout rates, they ranked first, and we ranked. You know, it's just like it was. You know, it's kind of sad that, you know, our kids. You know, it's like you were saying, how racism is a part of society, and the police department is, you know, just an example of what the whole society is made up, and so is our educational system. And there's so many struggles that we have to wage, and I think, you know, just, you know, people are getting impatient because the racism is still here and it's been addressed for so long. But I think it's a matter of working hard and a matter of struggling, you know, for almost the rest of your life. I mean, racism came about through the colonization. A lot of it came about through the colonization. That was, some 600 years ago? So it's been embedded and internalized within our society, within ourselves. And it's not going to take 10 or 20 years to wash it out. And I think we've made some major, you know, mobilization, but I think there's still prevalent racism and a lot of work ahead of us.
El Centro started in the early 70s, right? And you mentioned the some of the Indian health initiatives or Indian community.
Well, Seattle Health Board actually, we just
Late
celebrated
60s?
well, we started to do some stuff in the late 60s. Really, it was about the 70s that we started to do things. But we just celebrated our 30th anniversary this year. So.
And the Filipino Community of Seattle has been around since '35,
you know,
but
since 1935 we celebrated 65th anniversary, and this started by young students and young laboring Filipinos who came here mainly to go to work in Alaska, and they found the environment here so sad because they were not even welcome to get into private, or not private, but public
schools.
places, you know, and let alone acquire real estate properties. You know, I mean, we never had a chance to do that until after the last war, until after the last Second World War. But what is one thing that really has gelled us together or bonded us together is the sense in us, the clannies and the closeness of Filipino Americans, you know, maybe just like yours, when you see somebody who looks like you, he or if he is an uncle, if she's a she, she's an aunt, you know, and so we're just one big family. And one of the virtues too that probably have put us intact all these years is the virtue that education is the priority in every family's life. You know, I know of the first or the pioneering families who came here. For them to be integrated into the system is to tell the children not to speak the dialect. They have to speak only in English.
The assimilation you mentioned.
So that they could get assimilated into and unfortunately, these actually cut off that very important thing in their lives.
That connection to the culture.
Yeah, and so many of them have lost the roots, and there is that revival now in my community that you have to learn your roots.
The dialect.
Yeah, and that would make you a stronger person if you learn how you learn the history of how you came here, where you came from, and especially so if you could speak the dialect. So
the reason I asked about the history and how long ago the organizations had started is because when you say the women who started this were young and saw these disparities and did something to deal with that, it's been 20, 30 more years since there was this really big plan of action to start these centers. Do you think there's sort of been a falling off of interest or realization of some of the struggles that have gone into that, or do people realize that there is this network in the various communities to deal with some of these problems, to get counseling or educational assistance or mentoring or tutoring?
Well, I think I think definitely for here in Seattle, if someone who's native who's coming to town, and there is a lot of transition anyway. About 30% of the population moves back and forth year round. I mean, it's actually pretty large numbers. That folks know, okay, well, if I'm going to come to town, I'm going to go to the Seattle Health Board or United Indians of All Tribes Foundation or Seattle Indian Center or wherever, and I think those are really they're very important. And part of that is, I think, one of the strengths. That's also allowed. Not only you mentioned extended family, which is aunties, uncles, and the same thing here, which I think was probably why folks get along so well. Is one of the things, you know, some of the cultural activities that take place, and you have a lot of sharing, and you have a lot of folks that are meeting and talking and congregating, and those kinds of activities, I think, allow people to be able to create kind of a little bit of a collective knowledge. And so, you know, someone may have community-wise may have a problem with such and such, and they, you know, will do a lot of self-referral for various institutions that are here in this area for us. And I think part of that is the institutionalization. I mean, one of the things for us that we look at is we have the only Native American residency in the entire nation is at the Seattle Health Board. It's family practice residency.
For doctors, for the medical
physicians. We're very proud of that. And it's the only, actually, I'll say, in the world. But we're the only one. And I think that those kinds of, I mean, when we say about, you know we got to produce more physicians that can work in Indian country, not only in urban Indian country, but also in reservational settings. And we're very proud of that. We've produced about, I think we produce 2 to 3 physicians a year. I think we're on probably our 9th physician. Yeah, as long as it's been going on. It's a 3-year program. And so I mean, we look at institutionalization, sure. I mean, it's probably not as much fireworks that have happened, but I think that there are a lot of people that are behind the scenes, that are pushing, that are trying to create that kind of stabilizing institutionalization that will bring things to last for a long time. And those are really important.
What about the critics, though, who might say, well, that's like you said, it's institutionalized. What about those who are not part of that, the people who are outside that discussion? You know, we're saying it's institutionalized, so it's stagnant, it's not, you know, it's not welcoming or inviting to younger leaders or people who may be willing to get involved?
Sure. Why, you know, okay, we have a family practice residency where we're recruiting people all around the country, particularly Native physicians and young Native people who are going to participate in the process of healthcare. And I think with some of our, you know, and a lot of the other agencies do the same thing where they are supporting not only in the sense of these larger institutions, but like I'll bring back from one of the other groups that we, one of the little grants that we had, and it wasn't that little, it was through the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, and we were one of 14 funded nationally, and one of 4 funded in urban communities. That was the Healthy Nations Initiative, and part of that was, you know, was reaching out into those communities and groups that may not have felt a part of these institutionalized processes and say, okay, what do you want to do? How do you want to be here? What do you want to do to do this? Instead of Steve, or other staff going, yeah, we should go ahead and do this to.
We've got
this
a
is going to change.
panel and a commission and.
Yeah, this is what our, you know, my personal opinion is going to change the world, and we're going to fund $1 million program over this.
Right.
And it really wasn't about that, and was really reaching out to those groups that may not have felt a voice and say, what do you want to do? Great, whatever idea you have, let's go ahead and do it. And here's some money, and let's help you with some institutionalization once again. Because look, if people are going to go after grants, you got to know how to write a grant. You got to know how to pay grants. You got to know how to pay your rent. There's a lot of things. If you're going after a nonprofit, you have to know how to go after your nonprofit status. This is organization. And so
it takes someone who's been around a while and
it takes
is a bit of an institution.
Yes, to kind of help out with that. Who's been through the trouble of going through that process.
Right.
And
Sort of tapping that wealth that's already been there.
You know, I'm really proud of the fact that some of those groups are now going on that are bigger, stronger, that are doing things through that process. That even though this funding is ending, they are going out and they have now become their own entity that's going out. They're supporting themselves. They don't need Steve to tell them how to do this or other staff to go, oh yeah, well you need to talk to so-and-so for your resources.
Right.
They are now doing their own. They've got their own grants. They're completely self-supporting. They
So
just
it's giving rise to other groups
other
who are
groups
doing the
who are
same
going to
thing.
go out and do this, and to be able to represent that vast landscape of Indian people that live in this area. And hopefully through some of you know, that process will open it up to maybe more groups like that, or going after more grants that can do that. But that was kind of a luxury. Not every not every grant is going to do that.
Right.
So anyway, it's really cool, and like I said, it's really nice to look back and see a small group of a couple of volunteers that are now in about $12,000 in different kinds of grant funding that are paying for their various activities. And I have no doubt that the more youth that they're involving, the more youth that are being exposed to that and also being taught skills, that they will hang on to that group and maybe start their own deal. But that's not the Seattle Health Board. I mean, we had no interest in running I'll use the example, a Native theater group. We had no interest in doing that.
Right.
But how does a little theater group impact substance abuse and healthcare in general do that? So we got a little creative with that. Well, if you get kids actively involved in cultural activities and in theater, in writing plays, in whatever, you get them busy doing anything other than stealing cars and drinking, and in something that you're giving them little successes, they're going to make an impact. They will lessen those kinds of behaviors. And so
is that the way that maybe the various communities of color needs to approach all of these issues, all of these problems that they're confronted with, is starting at the community level rather than saying the city should do this or the county should give us this?
I think what's really important is to notice that they've already started doing that. I think that's a very important thing, is that I've been to so many where we're not, you know, where the communities of colors are not in the cameras talking to chief of police, and they're in their meetings. They're talking about what are we going to do to get the young people involved.
They're being active, not just talking.
Are we going to, you know, for example, our poetry class has been around since I've been around, and I mean, it's an amazing thing for me. I mean, growing up as a participant, I think it just, I mean, it taught me how to express my voice. And a major thing is they would take me to rallies, they would take me to marches, and they would tell me about these issues, you know, at 10 or 12 years old. And I'm like, why, you know, why are they doing this? And I'd write about it. and then they'd put me up on stage. They get 10. I had my first performance, and they put me up on stage, and I got that performance element. I got to learn how to do public speaking, and they've been doing that with so many different young people. And then through that process, I mean, we've been able to, you know, while we go to these marches and rallies and talk about the things that we learn, you know, people ask us about our history. Like, you know, you were talking about earlier, you know, about how a lot of the Filipinos, you know, they try to assimilate us as well as the Native Americans. I think an important thing is learning our history. And a lot of, you know, people would come to us and be like, who's Emiliano Zapata? And I'm like, some revolutionary guy.
Pretty important person.
Very important. I don't know, it's everywhere.
Yeah.
And so we kind of got embarrassed as young kids, because here we are, part of this program, you know, we're out there, si se puede, and doing all these things, and we don't know anything about our history, so we developed a program to teach our young people. Our young people decided to teach other young people about our history as well as ourselves. We used our resources, as many resources as the Centro has, the contacts and the elders in our community. We want to learn about what really happened during the colonization period.
So that's getting involved in community structures that are already there to start making changes, making differences, being like proactive. As opposed to, well, what's someone going to, you know, someone should do something about X, Y, and Z, as opposed to saying, okay, we're going to do something. Or,
A lot of communities are active in that way.
Is that then the approach that should be taken to start overcoming some of these problems of racism and profiling and disparities in education and healthcare and things like that? Is just going the community route, sort of working within the community first before looking outside, or should it be a dual purpose?
I think, like I said, you know, with the police, of course, the first thing you need to do is educate them before you start addressing the problem. And I think that reflecting on ourselves too, because like I said, all of us have internalized racial oppression within ourselves, and I think educating our young people, the new generations, about our history and about what's going on, because within the history lies the roots of racism.
Go ahead. I myself, and I believe that my community would concur with me, that for us as a community, the police is not the problem. You know, we have to examine ourselves, and we have to try to find a way to better ourselves with or without the police. Okay, and at this point in time, you know, minorities, if we would like to be a group that will have some voice in running the affairs of the city, the county, or the country, we have to encourage our youngsters who are talented to the political empowerment type situation. It is only when we'll be able to put your people in the government, my people in the government, that we will have a voice in the government. And that is what we should really look at very closely, because they have in the city, there have been a few Sibongas, there have been a few Chows, and a few Larry Gossett, you know, and we have to have more of them. And that is the only way that we could really compete, you know, and for the things that we're looking for to be heard, you know, is we have representative of our own kind running the government.
When you mentioned running, a lot of those people, all those people are elected people, and I know one of the big issues in elections is just the sheer amount of money that it takes to get elected these days, which can usually be very, you know, it presents a major hurdle, I think, especially for communities of color, especially if you're talking about people who may not have the same connections or, you know, affiliations and things that are, you know, big money donors. How do you get past that? You know, overcoming that hurdle, because you're very right. You need more people in positions of power.
We have in my community, now we have to be able to find somebody really who has that potential, of really getting up there. And
You mean the candidate themselves?
yeah, I
finding
mean,
the right candidate.
mentoring or encouraging them to really get into the political front, And I believe that if somebody who is talking sense, whether he is a black or a brown or a yellow or a white, somebody has to hear that person, and somebody will have to rally behind that person. Now, Ron Sims is an example. I mean, once the constituency has found out that he is not just a black, but he is also a good politician and he is a good leader, money will come in, to support him. And that's why we should encourage youngsters in our community to be looking at these political front, as a part of us running our communities, because there has to be somebody that will come out to represent us,
Let's talk a little bit about success, because I think a lot of what we're talking about is helping the various communities of color succeed or become successful in certain ways, whether it's within the community or in gaining access to health care and improving through education, that sort of thing. What do we consider success? What do you use as a barometer of success? Is it different for each community? Is it just money, or is it just education, or is it just political power?
It's on an individual basis too.
Yes,
I mean,
yes.
what I may consider something as successful for somebody else who's native may be completely different. I mean, there may be more of a cultural placement on the importance of what success is. I mean, that's very difficult. I mean, the thing that definitely I would look at is folks having access to stuff and being able to have the ability to make decisions, and if they work really hard and have the right talents, and they should be able to get into an institution like the University of Washington or work anywhere they want to work. And I don't know. I was asking somebody, about some stuff, and they said, "You know what, Steve? There's not enough. How many Native firemen are there in Seattle?"
Good point.
But yet you see what you see. When they have huge forest fires, you see a lot of Native people from tribal reservations that are hired. But yet, do you see the same thing in Seattle? So I mean, it was kind of a goofy thing and kind of funny, but on the other hand, there is an underlying bit of truth in there.
Yeah.
So what do I say is successful? I mean, getting folks into college and getting them into higher education is very important, but so is getting a great journey level job. There's great money to be had there. I mean, so there's a lot. I don't know. It is measured at a lot of different kinds of level, from the level of an individual to a group level to an institutionalized level. So I mean, it's a lot of different kinds of.
I bring up the question of success because it seems for a lot of younger people these days, success is measured in dollars and cents, rather than giving back to the community or bringing more people up in the ranks of this organization or that agency or whatnot. Is it going to be tough to sort of marry those differing viewpoints for people who consider, hey, I've got to get a job making a lot of money or do something, regardless of whether it's a job, that's going to make a lot of money, versus maybe people who've been in the community for a while who are more active in the community saying the definition of success is being successful for your community or giving back to your community. How do you mesh
There's
those?
lots of different kinds of ways you can give back to your community, and it's not necessarily that folks are going to put their houses up for mortgage, at that level. I mean, that's the one level that's like, whoa.
Yeah.
Or it could be spending time. We had a little program with some folks out at Microsoft. There's like 24 Indian people. It's probably a little bit more, but about 24 out of 24,000 employees at the main corporate
Who are native.
who are over there or identify themselves as native. And a few of those were doing a little mentoring program, you know, and that was making enormous impact, more than if they were giving $4,000 or $5,000 a year to somebody to run a program, but spending their great time and spending time with kids and just making that kind of connection and getting those kids on the campus so that kids could go, wow, I can succeed. Right. You know, that was huge. That was worth a lot of money. And so anyway, or is it, you know, do I want, you know, tons of Indian people that own property in the Seattle area? Sure, I take that too. You know, who are voters and who exercise an extreme amount of political will. Right. So I mean, I don't know. There's a lot of
somewhere in between. That sort of goes along with something you were saying, is you were thinking you wanted to be an attorney, but now since you've worked with the kids, you're going in a different direction.
Well, I mean, just to jump off, I mean, a lot of what you were talking about is what makes people happy. And a lot of times, you know, I mean, what makes me happy growing up in the political organization that I have is doing the work I do, doing community organizing work. And I saw a lot of issues facing the Latinos. I mean, dealing with farm worker issues in Mattawa, where, I mean, I'm not quite sure how many, but at least 100, 200 families living on a riverbank.
In Eastern Washington? In
Eastern Washington, which is very similar issues to the Filipino community. And I think, I mean, these are some major issues for me. I mean, these families, I mean, my mother was a migrant farm worker herself, and the stories she would tell me would just make me emotional and, you know, want to go out there and fight. And so that's what I wanted to do. And then working with kids and seeing the Latino issues, I mean, the things that they go through in the school, the dynamics of the school system, I mean, just the difficulties and the challenges they have to face because our society, I mean, isn't perfect. I mean, the racism is so prevalent for them, and it's creating a barrier for them to have self-esteem, to create a way of life that's going to make them happy, and it's going to, you know, identify who they are.
So what do you plan to do now?
I'm hoping that the Lord will bless me with some good way of going. I think definitely no matter what I'm doing, it's going to be some kind of organizing work for my community, whether it's for young people, whether it's for families. But I think it's very important that I stay active as a community organizer within my community. And I think it's very important, you know, we need a lot of community organizers, but we need a lot of, you know, political power as well as economic power, as well as educational power. And I think that's very, I mean, but what's very, you know, that happiness, that they're willing to be able to, you know, for those political leaders to be able to go up there and have that political power, where a lot of times it's very hard because of economic reasons, and a lot of, you know, the internalized racism within our own communities, you know, just the not getting along, the kind of like clashing with each other, or, you know, those kind of things, those issues come up, and it becomes very difficult to do the things that, you know, you feel that needs to be done in your community. So
let's talk looking ahead. Let's look ahead a little bit. Tell me something about the Filipino Community of Seattle. Do you guys have any programs or events that you're looking forward to or working towards?
You know, the Filipino Community of Seattle is 100% volunteer organization. Nobody is paid. So we are all giving our time and effort to try to help the community members. At this point, we have a few programs. We have a youth empowerment program that is being subsidized, or rather we get grant, and this is something that we have to work every year to be able to get some money to sustain the program. And it has been on its 5th year already, and we mainly go to the different schools around the area and look for kids who need help, you know, especially kids which are falling through the cracks, you know, and if we are able to turn them around and help them get back to have faith in the system, you know, then we would have succeeded. And we have also senior program wherein we have a lunch program for the elderlies twice a week, and on top of that we have a lot of social activities, and this is the thing that binds the community together. And at this point there are many, especially in old-timers, who are actually not being receptive in trying to get money from the government to run programs, because they feel that if you do that, then the government will own the community.
We'll be able to tell
And
you
so
what to do.
we are trying very hard to erase this kind of thinking, you know, because I tell them, you know, we are the fastest growing Asian community in the state, and we pay our taxes, and it is only right that we avail of some of them, you know, and bring it back to the community for us to be able to have programs.
To help those who need it.
Yeah, and so that is what we are now trying to do. And again, you could not downplay the really success of a volunteer program, because there is so much going on. You know, I mean, a volunteer way of spirit is something that could move mountains.
Yeah.
You know, so
That's a lot of the same things sort of going on in both of your organizations as well. We're going to start to wrap this up here, but can you give me a little rundown of some of the things you guys are working on, or any new programs or
Sure.
initiatives you're busy with?
There's lots of stuff going on all the time at our agency. There is, oh gosh, well, we're always busy. We're always busy seeing folks and taking care of them, and their primary medical care, and there's some other stuff that's going on too. I know we just wrapped up our 30th anniversary. We just started a national project, which is our Urban Indian Health Institute, which is to take a look at the health status of urban Indians, because there's no information out there. So epidemiologically, we're really looking at trying to take a look at that, with about 34 other urban Indian centers participating in that, and I'm kind of taking a little bit of a role with that. I know from there's lots of stuff going on. I feel at this opportunity, you know, it's like, well, there's other institutions out there. There's United Indians, I know fairly shortly is going to be doing their Daybreak Star Powwow, and folks should go out and support that, and it's really great. And I know that their big initiative is trying to get the People's Lodge going, and raising funds for that, and I know that our institution does support that. And you know, so there's lots of stuff going on. There's lots of youth programs. I know one of the research projects that I kind of am tail ending on, we're doing a little summer program for some kids where we're going to take them out to the U and kind of really prime the pump with saying, yeah, you could make it here.
Right.
We want you here.
Right.
And hopefully once they stay there for some indefinite time, they're not going to want to leave,
Yeah.
because it's a nice place to be at.
Right, exactly.
So, so we'll be doing that. And there's stuff going on all the time.
Okay, excellent. And El Centro also very, very busy. We could be here all day, just listing all the different services and programs that are available. But give me a quick thumbnail on some of the programs you guys are busy with right now.
I think definitely it's the same as a lot of your organization, Filipino organization. We do senior services as well. I think what I love about the Centro is it deals with a lot with social services. It helps the community in almost every aspect of the community. I mean, we have our infant mortality program. We have our Latino home ownership program, which has been a great help economically to the Latino community. We have our unemployment. We have MOP, which is case management, our Hope for Youth programs. And we help almost every element of the family, hopefully, as well as politically, are mobilizing them to learn about the issues and learn about the history that's here and so strong here here in Seattle, you know, with the Latinos, because a lot of times people don't know that there was a Latino struggle here, that there are Latinos. There's not a little barrio around here, you know, where you can go and see a lot of Latinos either. And you know, I get a lot of times Latinos themselves, I'll give them a tour and they're like, wow, I didn't know there was so much here for Latinos. I think definitely a lot of it is just recapturing and promoting our culture. It's one of our main principles.
All right, perfect way to wrap up. That's going to do it for us. I want to thank all of you for joining me here today. We will do this again at some point, and I think you guys raised some excellent points today and sort of gave folks some insight into maybe communities and issues and thought processes that they hadn't recognized before. So I want to thank you all for joining me today. That's going to do it for us. This is for this edition of Seattle Inside. I'm Natasha Smith. Thank you for joining us. Good night.
Right.